All right. I have one rule for the panel, and that's hold on one second. Are you gonna? Yeah, however you want. Sit. We're gonna get mic'd up here, but I'm gonna go ahead and share my rule. Whoever says AI has to give me $10 every time they say AI, and that's how we're gonna raise fund too. So that's my rule for this. Oh, all right, there you go. There's $10 right there. I was gonna start with you can keep it. I was gonna start with yeah, go ahead, yeah, keep it. I know, right? I was gonna start with where we're actually seeing AI as either a cost center or a revenue driver in enterprise. But what I'm actually more interested in, because I think we've heard that some today, what I'm more interested in actually is how are you pricing your AI for your customers? So in the age of SaaS and B2B SaaS, what we saw was 80 to 90% profit margins. But in the age of AI, because of compute costs and other things, we're seeing those compress to 50%, 60%. So how are you thinking about actually pricing your and let's just start with a quick intro on what you do, and then we'll get into that question. Go ahead.
Hey guys, my name is Anish. I'm one of Gradial's co-founders working on our growth and marketing.
My name is Fussell. I'm CEO of a startup called LangGrant, and we build AI infrastructure.
I'm Romesh, and I'm the founder of a company called LangGrant. We're in the space of enterprise databases and AI. It's one of 1 trillion companies that are in that space.
Let me ask actually, has anybody here struggled with pricing their AI agent? So it might be relevant to the audience. So a few people in the audience on the direction you guys are thinking about how you price your product going forward.
Yeah, so I think there's been this big movement towards this outcome-based pricing and stuff, right, in software in general. In our case, we have a product that basically sits between enterprise databases and the LLMs, the models. And so we send a lot of tokens and stuff to the LLMs. So we came to the conclusion, in our case, it was if the LLMs are pricing based on tokens, we can also price on the count of tokens going through. That being said, it's all unknown, right? I mean, everybody who's in this AI space, startups, customers, everybody, we're all experimenting. So the pricing itself, to answer your question, it's experiments in progress.
Yeah, I mean, we're building AI infrastructure, and what that means is that you've got to run those agents reliably in production. And what does that mean to you? And if you have an agent that's been running for, say, an hour, and it fails just before it gets completion, you just spend a ton of money. And the last thing you want to do is start from the very beginning again. So you need agents that perfectly recover from exactly where they left off. And I can tell you right now that every agentic framework out there today does not do that in any way. They are all unreliable, and they do not guarantee fully execution to their end. If people claim that, I'll be very interested to talk about it. But that's where we come in and think about that. And so we very clearly, we actually not only track reliability and recovery of that reduced costs, but also the fact that you can actually track all those tokens exactly, and then what you did and how you sum them all up. So we actually provide very accurate token usage around all those, and how you then surface that up into the underlying decision maker about whether this agent's being efficient in terms of what it's used in terms of token usage, and the observability you need in order to tweak that down. So without understanding its exact steps and what it did, you can't alter its future behavior.
Yeah, Gradial is solving for marketing operations, and so we did a little experimentation around the outcome-based pricing with tasks or workflows or even tokens or actions. And what we found was that abstraction layer can sometimes be difficult for customers to grasp, like what is the actual output. And so we started aligning this more closely to what marketing teams are actually producing in terms of their assets, or what we call artifacts. So we took it one level above and thought about, what does a marketing team actually benchmark in terms of what they produce? For us, it's marketing, right? And they're really thinking about the assets that they've shipped: landing pages, emails, social posts, paid media, and then reports or insights. And it really is just those 5 categories in most cases. And so we started aligning our pricing to essentially how many of those different types of artifacts are you producing as an enterprise. And that makes it much, much easier for the brand or the team to understand the ROI, understand the pricing, understand how much they need without kind of going through a calculator. You shouldn't need to go to a calculator for some of these enterprise workflows. So we've seen a lot more success and clarity around pricing that way. So it is outcome or output based, but the abstraction layer we've chosen is the one that's actually most familiar to our customer, in this case the marketer, and that's been easy and simple for us in enabling them to be able to benchmark that ROI and go into like a quarterly business review and know exactly what they've produced with agents and what the impact is.
And I would also add that you should also pray that the customers that use more of your outcomes have more money, because oftentimes it's not.
Yeah, that's right. So if we're leaning more towards this outcome-based pricing, right, which is what I'm kind of hearing across the board, then we obviously want to make sure our outputs are more reliable, number one, and secure. So how are you guys thinking about reliability and the security of your agentic infrastructure and making sure you're providing reliable outputs so you don't increase your spend on your back end, but then still have to, change the pricing, weekly basis for your customers. So how are you guys thinking about the reliability and security aspect?
Yeah. So I think in our case, reliability is like, are the answers of the database transforms coming from the models accurate? So I think that this is like a perpetual problem, and I don't think anyone has a solution to reliability from models, because by definition, it's probabilistic. It's like, what are those matrix multiplications finally giving you in the answers? So the way we thought about it was to provide the outcome or the output from the LLMs or the models in a form that's easily validatable by humans. So that in some sense, right, in our industry, there's something called a BERT benchmark that shows you that humans are also only so accurate. It's similar to the argument of self-driving cars versus humans, right? And nobody's going to solve that argument. It's about the emotion behind it. So I think no matter how much metrics we have for accuracy and so on, the goal of us, the goal we have is to how do we circumvent the argument so people don't argue with us on that. It becomes like, what is a statement I can present on accuracy that the prospective customer does not argue with? Because otherwise, is it accurate, or LLMs are never accurate, or self-driving cars are never going to get accurate, because the models by definition is always going to be some degree of inaccuracy. If you can just give them something like a little fig leaf that says, hey, now you can do this yourself, that's how we kind of circumvent the problem.
Yeah, I mean, but the hard problem is moving from just using AI models, we're building AIs in experimentation now, to moving them into production. And so there's the accuracy of the models and what they're doing. And yes, those achieved amazing accuracy, but it's where you run the actual business and code and the infrastructure you run it on, that's the hard problem to solve. And that's where, if you're building an agent, they have to solve basically 5 key problems. The recoverability of the business process, you're halfway through it all. That's using how many models, umpteen tools of calling them umpteen different models and existing systems around it all. You've got to solve the identity of an agent, about what it does. If your agent doesn't have a passport, in terms of its identity, what it's actually trying to do, and how it has its rights to do those things. Are you actually going to trust an agent to work on behalf of yourself and you go out into the world on the web and do stuff? I wouldn't even go near that today. So agent identity is key. You look at the observability around it, about what it's done, what it's doing in the past, and so that it's able to achieve and refine it in the future. And you've got to build trustworthiness as well into all that. And if you're not looking at all those together in a holistic thing, you're not really talking about production side of how you're running your agents.
But I actually want to dig a little deeper on the agent passport. You mentioned agent passport. I mean, what does that look like? That's kind of, what does that actually look like in production?
Well, there's various different ways of doing this, but you're going to come up with an Well, for us, we directly use particularly a particular standard called Spiffy. Spiffy is an identity standard that can get allocated to agents. It gives you an X509 credential, and then you can present that when you go to different sites around these things, or between agents and agents. And on top of that, you can actually layer, it will also give it actual rights about what it can achieve. So that Spiffy identity actually becomes its true identity, and you can then the other thing I'll do is, I haven't heard a lot about the conversation here, but we talk to a huge number of companies, and they're all building MCP servers across everything. And these MCP servers have effectively become the sort of the interface around all their external systems. So imagine you're in an enterprise today, you've got all this brownfield stuff already, you're trying to integrate with your agentic systems, everyone is sticking MCP servers in front of them, but no one's solving the hard problem of what the agent identity has in talking to the backing systems around them. They're just letting them run free reign. And so my question in the previous thing is like, okay, you were running things in production, but do you care about whether they fail? And are you trusting them enough to talk to your MCP servers about what they're doing? Because if you're not caring about those, then you're not really running in production. So those are sort of the problems that the community, what the whole industry is facing. It's the infrastructure as much as the models. The models have sort of become more and more intelligent. They're amazing, but without the right infrastructure to run these things, the identity, the security, the trustworthiness, all of this doesn't really kind of allow you to take.
You're referring to a broader thing of governance, right? That's like an entire topic in itself.
Yeah, we'll talk.
Spend a whole day on that.
Please.
Yeah, I agree. I think for us, we're operating at the workflow layer for the enterprise. And so that workflow itself is the North Star or benchmark for us in terms of reliability. So when we start for a marketing team, we start with examples of what good looks like and examples of what brand and authoring guidelines look like for them. And so in order for us to ensure reliability, for us, what we've seen is the best way to do that is essentially to mirror the process that a marketer goes through today, because there is a benchmark and a roadmap for what reliable means. Like, what does a marketer have to check off before they can ship something live? So that's our starting point for reliability that our agents are ingesting. Hopefully I'm allowed to say agent if it's not AI. I don't need to pay for that. But what we're seeing is that for our agents, like in order for them to be able to reason effectively and in a reliable and predictable way, because the models are probabilistic, we're essentially asking them to go through that same brand checklist that a marketer would have to go through, and then benchmark against what is a good landing page or a good email. And that gets us really, really high quality reliability. And we've seen that, I think there's some misconceptions that AI can introduce inconsistency, but we've actually seen the opposite. Most inconsistency is the result of subjectivity or just human error, different teams looking at different guidelines and doing different things. And so with agents, you can actually get a very centralized governance layer that operates in a relatively very predictable way.
Okay, so we have, we've had some answers centered around the model layer. We've had some answers centered around, MCPs, and I was actually going to ask you about, value at the enterprise level based on just operating off the model, or are we talking more about data sovereignty and the trust and reliability? What I'm very interested in today's market is actually the metric of the user staying on your platform and per month. Right? Because with autonomous intelligent systems, you can get outcomes from a lot of different systems today, right? So do you track on how much time a user is actually spending on your platform per month? And is that a valuable metric to your company as you're thinking about scaling and retaining users?
So I've been in the software business for many decades now, and this notion of tracking users' time on a software system, it's been bandied around since the 90s, and it's never really worked. And for whatever reason, one can speculate, maybe users' time is not a good indication of outcome or so on. I think that people are more interested in the outcome itself. In some sense, the question is sort of self-defeating. If you use user time and outcome in the same statement, what are you more interested in? I'll go back to another thing about MCP, if I may, sidetrack. So we, the core of our technology is based on MCP and MCP technologies. But we see a lot of people simply using MCP server as yet another API server. It's ironic to see people use agents like classic UI, classic web UI, and just classic SQL at the back end of the MCP server. So the agents are also being used in many large corporations, just like classic UI with a classic backend API. I don't know if any of you guys have seen that, and if you don't mind adding that to your comments.
Well, that's certainly where they start. We've built a large number of agentic systems, mostly with enterprises. They care a lot about data sovereignty and data tracking around where they are, particularly running them on premise. I'll give you an example. We work with a logistics company, and the logistics company they built software which runs warehouses. They have a 24 running warehouse, and we built a warehouse tracking manager agent from them that basically works on behalf as if it's a manager and effectively looks at all these incoming emails and effectively makes decisions on their behalf, and drives down their costs around those things. And for them, they were very keen about data sovereignty, data locality around these things, and identity around this, and keeping that. And yes, we've seen a lot of use of MCP server to begin with as an initial REST API, but that's just because MCP protocol itself is very basic at this point in time. We're working closely with if anyone else has been following it, but the Linux Foundation created the Agentic AI Foundation back in December, and that's where MCP protocol got donated to by Anthropic. So Anthropic are big into effectively building out on the MCP protocol and wanting to bring many more things like authentication to it all, and many other capabilities in the MCP protocol, so that you can actually enhance it to take on these different scenarios. So the Agentic Foundation is building on that, and so we'll see it move from a very simple protocol today, which quite frankly, if you go back 20 years, SYNC is the same thing, and then the chaos of SYNC is just repeating itself 30 years again now. We're like, oh my God, here we go again. And REST would do the same thing as well. So yeah, we'll see it emerge in time, but we are the people here who've got to set those standards correct, and we're going to do the right thing this time with MCP if we want to make it work, and that means identity, security, reliability around all of it.
Yeah, I think for us, like at the integration layer, I definitely agree that a simple like API integration or MCP, that's not the solve at the enterprise level. Like we need a much deeper integration into core systems of record to be able to operate them as if a marketer or like a digital coworker essentially. And you don't get that just with like the kind of simplest version of an MCP or an API. So we do see like a much deeper integration is necessary. And to your point earlier, Christopher, like on the usage in the platform, I think it's an interesting question, but what we're starting to look for is we do look at time spent in the platform, but we look closely at the types of tasks that our users are actually doing. So when we first started working with enterprises, we see a lot of marketers automating content updates and bulk updates to their site using Gradial, which is impactful. There's a clear ROI there. They're kind of low value, routine, mundane tasks. We don't want marketers doing that, so we automate that. But now what we're looking for is, are people shifting from those types of tasks to the type of concepting, strategic, creative tasks that agents enable? Can I make 100 personalized landing pages for everyone in this room, and then make those landing pages really high quality, and then start to personalize a campaign around it? So we're more tracking the shift than the actual time itself for the users, because obviously that's not a good barometer. If they're all still in there doing content updates, like the product promise isn't being met. But if the time is going up and that time is shifting towards what's really high impact for a brand, and the lower value stuff is on autopilot, that's the shift we're looking for in the platform.
Okay, so obviously we have three highly technical founders. You guys are all technical, and we have 60-70% of the audience building, especially on the agent, and probably a lot of vertical applications. So I'm curious if anybody has questions for them. Marketing is a hot topic right now. Everybody in the AI space wants to find their wedge. They want to get distribution. And just want to see if the audience has questions, please.
Yeah. So, thank you. So I'm a practitioner. I'm a VP of marketing for a $300 million company. What we find, so we try to build agents.
Get his number.
Yeah, I was about to ask.
My question for you is, as marketers, we use a number of safely guarded types of organizations, Microsoft, Salesforce, Qualified, and they are very difficult to work with. And so my issue is when we build agents, and I think for all of you, when you build agents, we have to deal with these very large companies and Amazon and Google, and they make it very difficult to be able to build those agents. And so that's the main problem that we have, is to access the data, but that data is in prison, in a jail, and we cannot get it out. And that's my main issue, is that in marketing we need to be flexible. We think a landing page is easy. So my question to you guys is, how do you deal with those, jailhouses that are those repositories of data that, and no offense to Salesforce, I know they're in the room at Google, no shade, we use them, we love them, we're our customers. But that's the main issue for us, is that we cannot access the data properly and make it function.
I've never heard that put that way. Data in jail. All right. Straight to jail. All right.
Don't give them your data. That's the answer.
Yeah. So it's definitely like a really key problem that we see for a lot of our customers is that they have so much intelligence on their customers. Like brands actually know their customers really well with years and years of touch points and data, but it's a challenging process to get that information out. And so that's partially what we work closely with our customers on solving during the onboarding phase is setting up the integration and the scopes and permissions in a way where we can start to retrieve that relevant data and augment the workflows we're solving for with it. The other problem that becomes a big issue is what you alluded to, which is just the fragmentation. So not only is it that, it's hard to get out of one system, but you're actually working with 20 or 30 different systems. And so one of the kind of core areas of values, like as we do this onboarding, we start to create this reference architecture about where should data live, where does the relevant information live, and then build the knowledge graph based on that for us to use as part of the workflow. So there's not a super easy answer to your question. This is part of our integration and implementation. That work just needs to be done, but it is high impact, especially when you're solving for the fragmentation too.
Yeah, I mean, I've been mostly working with large enterprises and they're very concerned about where their data goes. And so data locality is just critical for them. And so they keep it. And so most of my interactions have been building agentic systems that talk to a number of different databases that they have, existing systems that they have that they're closely controlled underneath. And the amount of data that actually goes out is very restricted. I mean, you can even go back and look at JPMC that published a paper from the CTO back at the end of last year. He said, we're refusing JPMC to ever use another SaaS system again in our life. We're cutting all ties with every SaaS system we work with because all our data has to remain internal. So they can do that. They're large, things like that. But I mean, you have to kind of control where it is. And as we went back to earlier, data is king. You have to own your data and build the models on it and make localized models for this and start running things on smaller local models as well.
Do you get your answer? Do you want a third perspective?
I love the third perspective because we are lost. I mean, honestly, it's a tough problem for us.
So my perspective is from my business. We're largely in the data business. We have people, a lot of customers who continue to run on-prem infrastructure to keep the data on their site. We also have customers in the cloud. My perspective is very simple. In order to gain the benefits of the cloud, which are huge, people sacrifice their freedoms and went to jail. That's it.
We got time for one quick question. Go ahead.
Mike?
Question?
No, it's okay. Just project.
Okay.
Project. I'll repeat.
So we talked about locality, and I think enterprise scale companies need not just the vanilla model as it is, but they need to customize it maybe to teams or departments or problems. What does customization look like in the future of development in the space?
Yeah, I think that what we've found is that a lot of organizations come in thinking that they need a lot of customization and fine tuning on the models, but that's actually not the case. They can solve for a lot of the impact purely by getting the right context and not putting the wrong context in. And I think that's why we see a lot of the latest and greatest models don't even allow for fine tuning. It's purely become a context engineering question. And that is a hard problem because when you think of a marketing organization like, at a very large enterprise, they have a ton of context and they can't even point to where all of it is. But that's the problem to go solve is what's the 80% context? Like if you were onboarding me to go do the job, and we actually ask customers this, like if you were onboarding one of Gradial's founders to go do this job, what is the information that you'd give them? You'd give them a cheat sheet, do's and don'ts, brand guidelines, and some examples of what's good and bad. And you'd use that to get to 80% and then start optimizing from there. And so that's primarily where we've focused. I think for our use case, fine tuning and like changing the model itself has been not where the most ROI is. Getting the right context into the model is tremendous ROI.
So Hasibo from CLR AI has an amazing product that helps with that as well on the customization and especially retaining context dynamically for outcomes. Go ahead and respond, and then we got to wrap up. Go ahead.
So I will second what you said, Anish, because so in our product and our testing, the context trumps everything in terms of resulting accuracy. And it's amazing to see we support all kinds of models in our system, and the differences between the models are few and far in the outcomes when the outcomes are concerned. But the change in context, the point at which you give it, the sequence at which you provide your context, the ordering of the context is just too dramatic. So I would definitely second what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, we're also just seeing enterprises also start to at least take smaller models that they want to build themselves very specifically and keep their own data in it. Going back to the warehouse example again, we've built with them a localized building on top of a llama model, one that basically has become the warehouse manager, and effectively it's a model around all that, and they can run it locally because it allows them to control costs and actually have control over their data.
All right, guys, give it up for your panel, please.
Thanks for